Hi everyone, movie synopsis here, welcome to today's episode. Today I am going to explain an American fantasy adventure film Pete's Dragon. This film is about an orphan kid and his best friend Elliot. Spoilers alert, watch out, and take care. The opening scene of the film starts with a family going on a trip through the beautiful mountains. Little Pete is reading a book about a puppy named Elliot. A deer runs into the road and causes Pete's dad to swerve the car, causing a deadly accident that kills Pete's parents. Pete wanders out of the car and runs straight into the woods all alone. A pack of wolves come out and surround Pete, but they are scared off by the appearance of a huge green dragon with wings and yellow eyes that saves him. Pete sees the dragon and both seem to have lost their parents and start to feel connected. He takes Elliot in his paw and flies away with him. 6 years later, Mr. Meacham is a well-known man in the city. He is famous for telling his stories to a group of kids, a story about the dragon that lives in the woods. He tells the kids that he has seen a giant dragon in the forest. He is known as the only person who has seen the dragon. But nobody takes his story seriously, they just like the story. His daughter Grace, Bryce Dallas Howard, who is a park ranger, listens in on the story. But still, even his daughter Grace, who happens to have spent his entire age living close to the forest, has never seen any dragon yet, and nor has her fiancé Jack, who is a logger. Also Natalia, her daughter. Pete, now played by Oaks Figley, lives with Elliot in the woods now. He has been living here for 6 years, and that's probably why he has become very used to the animals. He has become exceptional at many skills like surviving, hunting, fishing, and playing with stones. The jungle is now his home. One day, Pete catches a rabbit, but a bear lurks behind him. The bear runs away once Elliot shows up. Together, Pete and Elliot fly above the woods. Elliot also has the ability to turn invisible. At night, Pete tells his storybook and after that, they sleep in a cave. The next morning Pete wakes up and hears people talking. Slowly he goes down the forest and sees Grace, who is going through the woods, doing her job choosing the trees, while Pete observes her from a hiding place. When she's not looking, Pete sneaks by and takes a compass locket out of her bag. Grace thinks she hears something in the woods, but she sees nothing and leaves. A group of lumberjacks led by Gavin is working in the woods, chopping down some trees. Gavin's brother Jack Wes Bentley, also Grace's fiancé, shows up along with his daughter Natalie while Grace arrives on the scene. None of them are happy that Gavin is cutting down trees on his own accord. Natalie then sees Pete in the woods and follows him. Pete climbs a tree and Natalie does the same. She slips and almost falls, but Pete catches her, causing them both to fall. They land on a branch and Pete hangs onto her, but Natalie drops a few feet and gets a scrape. The adults come running by and they discover Pete. Grace is suspicious right away and asks the kid who he is. He runs away, but Gavin catches him as he tries climbing up another tree. Pete falls and bumps his head, knocking himself out. Elliot then wakes up as if to sense something is wrong. He lets out a low groaning sound, which Gavin hears. When Elliot realizes that Pete is missing, he gets worried and starts looking for him right away. When he sees lumberjacks and Gavin cutting down the trees, he gets angry and hits a tall tree and crashes it down to the earth, leaving Gavin suspicious that he starts telling his crew to go up the hill in the forest. They all go in, looking for the mystery animal who hit the tree. Pete wakes up in the hospital. He is feeling strange and confused about where he is now. As the doctors are telling Grace that he's fine, police ask Grace how can this kid be found in the jungle, why is he alone? Meanwhile, he escapes out the window. Pete runs into the streets of the city, going as far as to climb a school bus and hop onto another car. He is eventually found by Sheriff Dentler, along with Grace and Natalie. They take him in. At night, Gavin and his mates go into the woods, fully armed. Elliot kept himself invisible, and that is the reason nobody has ever seen him in the jungle. The men find Pete and Elliot's hideout, causing Elliot to reveal himself. He swipes Gavin's gun as the men make a run for it. Elliot then sneezes on Gavin and gets snot all over him. Elliot doesn't kill any of the men, but tries to follow them to the city, looking out for Pete. The men flee the scene as they were all scared to death. Grace brings Pete back to her home. He tries running away again, but Grace promises to take him back to the woods if he just stays the night. Pete is given a real meal for the first time in ages. He tells Natalie about Elliot, which Grace overhears and recognizes as the same dragon her dad told her stories about. Grace then gets a call from the sheriff, who says that they found records of Pete's family having gone missing. Meanwhile, Elliot flies around town and is spotted by people near the hospital. He eventually comes across Grace's home and sees that Elliot is doing okay. He flies back to his cave. In the dark night, Pete and Natalia are talking about the dragon, Elliot. Pete tells her everything about Elliot. Meanwhile, Grace enters the room. She then gets close to Pete and asks him to tell her everything about Elliot. Pete shows her the book and the painting. Grace starts to believe the story and gets curious to know more as Gavin with his mates are arguing with Grace's husband about something they saw back in the forest. Gavin is telling him to come with us in order to kill this beast and possibly bring him in. Jack doesn't believe him and says no to him right away. The next night Elliot sneaks into Grace's house and sees Pete with Grace's family. He sees him as they are playing together happily while Pete is reading the storybook. Pete used to read this every night with Elliot before going to sleep. Elliot gets back and flies away to his place. He gets really sad missing Pete. He thought he lost his family member whom he has been protecting for years. Grace, who has now become very curious, takes Pete's painting to Mr. Meacham, who was telling stories about a dragon he had seen in his childhood. Grace shows her the painting of Pete and Meacham all of a sudden matches his painting with Pete on a dragon they had seen. Shockingly, it was very similar. Meacham tells her that, when he was a kid, he was wandering around in the forest and all of a sudden he felt a massive movement of noise and crash. He said I triggered a shot at him, but he kept quiet. The next day, Pete guides Grace, Natalie, and Mr. Meacham into the woods to find Elliot. Pete runs towards the forest showing his place to the new family. All of a sudden the dragon becomes visible, to the astonishment of everyone. Everyone gets scared. Natalia touches Elliot and a moment of relief and laughter can be seen in their eyes. Mr. Meacham is so delighted to have his childhood memories and dreams come true seeing the dragon on such an occasion. Moments later, Gavin and his men come in and fire a shot at Elliot, tranquilizing Elliot before capturing him. Pete starts shouting, telling them to stop hurting Elliot. Don't kill him. But they listen to no one and get him strangled into a net. The men keep Elliot sedated and locked up in a warehouse. Pete and Natalie plan the attempt to set him free through the skylight. Natalia sees a corner window sight open and tells Pete to go there. They shut the door behind them and start unlocking every knot, and finally, Elliot is freed. Elliot tried to fly but has become too weak to fly, but he makes himself invisible. At the same time, Gavin brings the sheriff and other townsfolk to see Elliot. They see the door fully locked. They crash the door, but when they enter the warehouse, he is nowhere to be found. The whole squad can't believe this. Gavin thinks he flew out, but Elliot is just invisible, while Pete and Natalie are hiding in the truck, which Grace notices. Mr. Meacham arrives and helps the kids break out of the warehouse. Elliot is exposed, and everyone begins to chase after them. The whole police squad watches out and goes for Elliot, Mr. Meacham, and the kids. Elliot is still too weak to fly, and his attempt causes him to fall hard on the truck and cut off the brake line. Gavin tries to get Mr. Meacham to pull over, but he refuses. Gavin drives up ahead and tries to get them to stop before the bridge. Mr. Meacham is unable to pull the brakes, causing him to slam into Gavin's truck as the men run away. Mr. Meacham pulls the emergency brakes and stops at the end of the bridge. The police are coming in closer. Elliot is now angry and he runs to the top of the bridge. Pete pleads with him not to do what he's about to do, but Elliot breathes fire down on the bridge to stop the police from advancing. Grace and Jack come by in their truck and halt before the fire gets them. The fire breaks through the bridge and causes the truck to start falling. Gavin attempts to rescue Grace and Jack as Jack breaks the glass in the back. The bridge starts breaking, causing the truck to plummet down along with Elliot. After a tense moment, Elliot flies up with Grace and Jack riding on his back. He brings them to safety and then flies away with Pete. Pete and Elliot return to their part of the woods. A tree has fallen over their cave, leaving them with nowhere to stay. Pete knows this means they cannot stay there anymore, and it also means they have to leave each other. This also means that Pete will have to leave his friend for good, even though he does not want to. He returns to live with Grace, Jack, and Natalie, and Elliot flies away to find a new home. Afterward, Elliot's existence slowly fades from the town's memory. Gavin has learned to be more scrupulous and has moved on from the experience. Grace and Jack get married and adopt Pete, and as for Elliot, he is not seen or heard from again. But if one knows where to look, like Pete, Elliot can be found living among many other dragons.